Peace. What's good? How y'all doing? This is ZaZaAli. Today is, what is today? Saturday, June 4th, 2022. I pray that this message reaches you well. Shout out to all of my group members. I'm excited about this conversation today. And I think I am going to be able to share part of this clip on YouTube. Not I think I am going to. Running the risk, obviously, of my channel getting a strike or getting taken down, but I don't care. This is a subject that is very near and dear to my heart. This is something that I've been researching for more than 13 years now. This was probably the most inspiring subject in terms of getting me started down the rabbit hole, as they say. When it comes to, conspiracy or conspiracy theory, not just in terms of, weather modification and all the stuff we're going to talk about today, but just, when I started really paying attention to this subject, it made me look at crack cocaine in a different way, for instance. And crack cocaine is one of the subjects that I covered in the scientific intervention in our affairs. But I'm saying that this particular topic, once the blinders sort of came off my eyes, actually there were never blinders on my eyes. I just needed to see it. And once I saw it, the veil was lifted, so to speak. So when I 13 years ago, started paying attention in Oakland, in the Bay Area, to the drastic change that I was seeing in the sky, I went so, heavy into the research that I would stand on the corner sometimes and try to get people to just look up. And even when I was able to have conversations and dialogues with people, it really occurred to me that most people just don't want to know. And I even had this conversation with people in my family, people that were really close to me, when I was adamant about at least getting people to be interested in the subject, be curious about the subject, because, especially parents, our children are going to inherit this world. But it really, really showed me that I was living in a different dimension of consciousness and that a lot of people just simply don't want to know. So for people like me, people like some of the, scientists and great minds that I'm going to talk about today, we are carrying the burden for all of the people that don't want to know. And it's a very heavy burden to carry. Let's be honest. Let's be clear. And we're not even going to talk about the Jim Jones juice today. But this is a subject that now, in hindsight, I realize the Jim Jones juice is absolutely 1000% relative to this subject. And unbeknownst to me, 6-7 years ago, when I wrote the scientific intervention in our affairs, part of what I talked about in the book was the precipice or the prerequisite for the technology that they would later go on to perfect. I'm assuming it's perfected. They're putting it in people's bodies. In terms of the Jim Jones juice as we know it today. So there's so much for me to talk about in terms of this subject. And one of my biggest self-criticisms of myself is that I have an issue editing myself. So like for this video, for instance, I have, I think, 16 slides and then 2 separate videos. But I want to stay under an hour so that, the information doesn't get monotonous. These are heavy topics, obviously, so I don't want to put too much on you guys in terms of bandwidth. But this is a subject that I'm going to be doing multiple, innumerable number of videos about, because it's just, we could talk for 12 hours straight and not even scratch, the subject of this. So let's get into this real quick. I have my private membership page. This full video, as well as all of my content, is available on my private membership page. This is all about high quality content and high vibrational energy and conversation, even when it comes to talking about the things that are difficult to talk about, things that are kind of scary, or things that people aren't talking about. This is my lane. I'm not afraid of any of this. but that's because I have a very inquisitive mind and I'd rather know than not know. So if you'd like to see this full video in its entirety, as well as all of my content, you can sign up for my private membership page. It's $22.22 per month. Shout out to all of the beautiful souls that have already joined me. I was actually thinking about doing this video live last night. I was gonna like go into the group membership page and tell everybody to come through, but it was like 10:30 at night, which means it was 1:30 on the East Coast. And, I'm still kind of growing and building the page. So that'll be coming soon. Then I can talk about this kind of stuff with you guys live and get your interaction and your responses. I have also launched an on-demand page on my website. If you don't want to join the membership channel and maybe you just want to watch a specific video without having to, commit to a monthly fee, we have an on-demand page now as well. And this video is going to be available on demand if you'd like to see this content in its fullness. Lastly, my next event is going to be July 23rd in LA. It's going to be a rooftop sunset event. I'm really excited about it because it's going to be a beautiful day. The weather is going to be beautiful, of course. And I'm excited about the way that we're putting this event together. We're going to have a private dinner initially, and then we're going to have a separate open town hall meeting where we're going to come and have a meeting of the mind. So stay tuned for that. I'm super excited. I'll be posting flyers and everything in the coming days. All right, so let's get into this subject, pardon me. Trails of chemicals. Have to be careful about how I talk for these first few minutes. Let me set my timer actually, which I haven't done. I don't even know how long I've been talking so far. Let's see. All right. Where's my clock? I was supposed to do this when I first started. This I'd let you guys know this is where my inner nerd gets a chance to stretch her legs out, because all of this topic, the science and the metaphysics of this is very fascinating to me, even as the agenda is wicked and very dangerous. All right, so this particular subject, some of the things we're going to talk about today, as well as some of the ongoing videos that I'm going to do around this particular subject, as well as the Jim Jones juice, the trails of chemicals. I'm being careful about how I use the language, but you can read it, obviously. Weather modification, geoengineering, HAARP, GMO trees, fish, food, air, soil, water, and the impact on wildlife and nature, tampering with Earth's electromagnetic field, which is important because we are electromagnetic beings. So we represent the microcosm of the macrocosm, which is something that I've really been screaming. This is not just about what's happening out there. Whatever is being done to our planet is being done to all of humanity and all of nature and wildlife. Radio frequency wars and mind control, remotely controlled NANO tech, AI immersion of the biological and technological world. In the Kingdom Within presentation, which this is a project, it's not a presentation. So I know you guys keep hearing me talk about it, but I'm building it because once I put it out there, it's going to be done. And it's a lot of content and a lot of information. So, but I'm going to cover all of these things in that presentation as well. But this particular topic deserves its own, presentation. So
just wanted to
let me go back before I get to that. So yeah, that's some of the stuff we're going to talk about today. Once I hit my hour, if I go over my hour, I'll just be doing a continuing kind of series about this subject because, 1 hour will barely scratch the surface.
Just wanted to tap in real quick and show y'all how they spray in the skies. You notice that thing sprayed back there at all. It's all concentrated over here because they're trying to block out that spot right there. See it right there? That little spot, that's not the sun. See it right there? That's not the sun. That's a reflection off the glass dome. The sun is right there. That's a reflection. In order to have a reflection, you must have a mirror or a glass. In order to make a fucking reflection, you have to have a mirror or a glass to have a reflection. This is a reflection off of the dome. Earth is covered by a dome, all right? It's a reflection. They're trying to block it out. There's no spray back here. See, the sky is clear back here.
It's the brave ignorance for me. And I see these type of videos all the time where people are talking about the second sun, which is what I'm really the solar engineering aspect of this is really gonna be the focus for today, even though there's like 100 other aspects to this. But because I continuously see this conversation about the second sun, once again, humanity is not paying attention. And for the original people, the indigenous people in particular, African people, the native people around the planet, the darker skinned melanated people, I cannot stress this enough. We still have not learned our lesson about underestimating the evil and wicked significance of this world. I'm not just going to say white people, because this is not just white people. This is a global, highly covert, highly dangerous agenda that's taking place. Are the people at the very top of the pyramid white? Yes, white men. Not just white men, but yes. But white people, European, all over the world are being heavily and greatly impacted by this. And my research into Morgellons disease, which I talk about in the scientific intervention in our affairs, I'm going to talk about this briefly later in the video, but this is something that I'll expand on later on, because Morgellons disease seems to be predominantly impacting European people. That's number one. Number two, Dr. Lee Merritt, who I have a very high level of respect for. When I get into the Kingdom Within presentation, in terms of the Jim Jones juice, her research states that Europeans are a very highly statistically impacted group of people, specific genotypes in Europe that are being greatly affected in ways that other races are not. Now, there's a lot of layers to that too. Obviously, the percentage of, African or darker skinned people around the world that are not taking it, that has an effect, right? Do I trust any of the statistical information that any of the global governments are putting out? Absolutely not. But because I have such a high level of respect for Dr. Lee Merritt, and because I'm watching and paying attention to the statistics of people that are being adversely affected, I believe that there is some truth to that. So going back to my original point, the indigenous, melanated, Black, African people of the world, we have been for thousands of years underestimating the science, like that whole Darwinism, natural selection. All of that is relative to how we got to where we are right now. So you can hear the brave ignorance in this man. I don't even want to get into the flat earth conversation, because people that it's like very cult-like behavior. And I've never been, my loyalty is to the truth. So for me, I know what I see in the sky. I'm looking out at the sky right now and I see white, pitch white, like somebody took a white out brush and just painted the sky. Not gray clouds, not partly cloudy, but whiteness, right? So when I started to see the sky looking like that, that was my initial motivation. I wasn't setting out to prove that the earth was flat. I wasn't setting out to prove that the trails with the chemicals in them were real. I was just seeking truth. And a lot of this, when I talk about the algorithm is creating consciousness, people aren't seeking truth. They're seeking to prove their point. So here is a very blatant example of somebody in brave ignorance, flat out wrong, 101,000% wrong. And people sent me this video to prove the point about the second sun. Not one person, but like 3 or 4. That's why I saved it. So let's get into the actual science. The trails of chemicals is the public's term for the classified ongoing artificial modification of Earth's climate systems using reflective, NaNO, materials or aerosols to reflect sunlight. The aerosols are dispersed via jet aircraft trails that expand into reflective artificial clouds. As noted above, the trails of Chem term is not a scientific term and is thus used to discredit the validity of the anti-geoengineering effort. Now, you can look at this video, take his position about the second sun and the dome and all of that out of the equation. You can look at the video and see lines in the sky. And it has been so perplexing to me for the past 10 years how people can be going about their day-to-day business and not see what's happening right over them. And this was the precipice, unbeknownst to me. God was showing me and revealing me things way before any of this took place, prepping me mentally and spiritually to see, again, most people don't want truth, number one. And number two, how something so blatantly obvious could be so oblivious to the masses. Because for 2 years now, this whole agenda has been blatantly obvious to me, but the masses fell for it hook, line, and sink. When I found this video, this is a real music video. Apparently this female is popular. I had never heard of her before. I was doing research for another presentation and I stumbled across this video. Hopefully this doesn't get my page. I didn't even think about it before, but hopefully this won't be a copyright issue. I don't care about the monetizing aspect of it, but hopefully this won't get my page flagged. But again, going back to and what I've been talking about, the illusion of consciousness, for instance, they put this information out into the world. And I don't really know her. Maybe she's making a political statement, right? And she's being subliminal about it. I don't know her well enough to know, but I do know that this video is up on YouTube and they didn't take it down. If I were to do a full-thrown expose on this subject, my page would be deleted, just for using certain words, right? So they let certain content out. They put truth out in order to keep people confused. Because again, most people don't want to know. So they see a video like this where this woman is singing about this topic, something that is very deadly and dangerous and detrimental to humanity. I mean, if you think about the levels of dementia and ADHD and Alzheimer's in our culture right now, it is directly tied to the levels of aluminum that that are in our upper atmosphere, which naturally is going to fall down on humanity. People breathing it in, it's in the air, it's in the water, right? That aluminum matriculates and settles into a certain part of the brain, calcifies the pineal gland, but it also stops the brain from progressing and continuing to create and to build and expand. So when those neural networks start to break down, so to speak, the brain starts to retract and move into an opposite direction, so to speak. Geoengineering is the artificial modification of Earth's climate systems through two primary ideologies: solar radiation management, which is what going to be our main focus for today, and carbon dioxide removal, or CDR. When I do the part 2 of the illusion of consciousness, I'm going to get into global warming and this whole concept of removing carbon dioxide or CI2 from the atmosphere. That is a subject that, deserves its own sort of spotlight, so to speak, because I don't want to minimize that. And it's very layered and multi-layered, I should say, when you talk about CO2 and, methane and all of these different things that are in the atmosphere. We're only talking about it, or at least the powers that be, quote unquote, the powers that used to be, because they're on their way out. But, the problem, reaction, solution, Hegelian dialectic principle: create the problem, let the people react, and then you come through and create a solution, which we're going to see in this video in just a second from Bill Gates about his participation and investment in this solar radiation management aspect. Excuse me. But stratospheric sulfate aerosols engineering. This sounds complicated. It sounds scientific, but this has been happening for 30 plus years. This is not something that they're considering doing. This is something that they have been doing. The ability of stratospheric, and this is, if you know the guy who did that previous video or any of the videos about two suns, there's so much information out about this conversation. The fact that people who have platforms aren't doing their due diligence to make sure that they are properly arming their audiences with the right type of information. This truth mixed with falsehood. And maybe not even truth. Well, yeah, truth mixed with falsehood, because he's obviously identifying the lines in the sky, but then he just went completely left. The ability of stratospheric sulfate aerosols to create a global dimming effect has made them a possible candidate for use in geoengineering projects. Remember, all of this is already happening. To limit the effect and impact of climate change due to rising levels of greenhouse gases, delivery of precursor sulfate gases such as hydrogen sulfide or sulfide dioxide by artillery, aircraft, and balloons has been proposed. It's been more than proposed. It is being used, and it has been being used for more than 30 years now. According to estimates by the Council on Foreign Relations, 1 kilogram of well-placed sulfur in the stratosphere would roughly offset the warming effect of several 100,000 kilograms of carbon dioxide. And again, this is going into the whole global warming hoax, and I call it a hoax because we're dealing with the Hegelian dialectic principle. These people aren't doing anything for good for our planet. They're not doing anything good for humanity. You can put a watermelon seed in the ground, and it will give life to thousands of watermelons. So we don't have a food shortage problem. We have a Satan problem. All right, so let's pause this for a second. Bring this over here, and I want to show this video. This is actually up on YouTube, so you guys can go and watch this. Why is Bill Gates funding solar geoengineering research? This video is 10 minutes, but I want to watch the full video because this video was put out in 2019. So they're proposing this technology as if it's something that we can use in the future. These people are liars. They are manipulators. They lie for a living. And the same people that are involved with this technology are involved in the Jim Jones juice. They're involved with the fires taking place all over the planet, earthquakes, as we're going to talk about a little bit later. There's a lot of elements to this technology that are affecting all of human life, all of the natural and wildlife elements, right? But in 2019, they introduced this to the public as this is something that we are potentially pursuing, which we're going to prove. We shouldn't have to prove it because everybody watching should already know this, right? But we're going to prove that these people are lying, as they always do. This video is on CNBC. It's only 10 minutes, but I'm going to play the whole thing in its entirety because it's important for us to know, what the programming is, what the agenda is. And then a lot of times the answer to our questions come from even just knowing what their intention is.
The record number of fires burning across Brazil's Amazon rainforest has prompted renewed global outcry over climate change and big spending. $5 million from Leonardo DiCaprio, 10 million pounds from the UK. Meanwhile, Bill Gates is backing the first high-altitude experiment of one radical climate change solution, creating a massive chemical cloud that could cool the Earth. It's called solar geoengineering, and it's highly controversial.
How long will it be that countries keep experiencing these climate impacts before someone gets desperate and says, hey, we need to cool the planet with solar geoengineering?
It would look something like this. Thousands of planes would fly very high and use nozzles to inject millions of tons of light-reflecting particles into the stratosphere. It would create a thin chemical cloud of those particles around the whole planet, blocking some sunlight from reaching the surface. It would mimic a giant volcanic eruption, which we know cools the Earth. Back in 1991, Mount Pinatubo erupted in the Philippines. It was the largest eruption to affect a densely populated area, creating avalanches and giant mud flows that left more than 700 dead and 30,000 homeless. It also spewed a cloud of 20 million tons of sulfur dioxide particles into the stratosphere. That chemical cloud was hundreds of miles across and reflected about 2% of sunlight back to space. And in 1992, the Earth was cooler than in 1991.
That is part of the mechanism, but you do this in a controlled way.
Modeling studies have found that it could reduce the intensity of heat waves, for instance. Apparently, it could reduce the rate of sea level rise. It could reduce the intensity of tropical storms.
But it also comes with significant risks and uncertainties.
Things like mass famine, mass flooding, drought, of kinds that will affect very large populations.
It could weaken monsoons in India, China, and Africa enough to affect crops. It could eradicate blue sky.
You start increasing the amount of diffuse light and you have less direct light, which is the same thing as saying it looks hazy and white.
And if the global community decides it should stop?
So you stop injecting it, and after a year, the cloud is gone, and you get this rapid warming at a rate much faster than you would get if we had done nothing. If you've taken out the greenhouse gases that are adding to the warming, then the temperature won't go up, it'll stay what it is. So if we don't stop emitting greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, we don't try as hard as we can to do that, then there's no point in doing solar geoengineering.
A 2016 opinion poll conducted by the Harvard group doing solar geoengineering research found that 67% of subjects support its use. One reason this technology is appealing, it's cheap. One study estimates it would cost an average of $2.25 billion globally every year for the first 15 years of deployment. Compare that to the $500 billion the US government estimates it will cost just the US by 2100 if no action is taken against climate change. Or the 1.6 to 3.8 trillion projected global spending by 2050 on low carbon energy production. You can also compare it to direct air carbon capturing, another climate change solution backed by Bill Gates and by big oil. It involves sucking billions of tons of carbon out of the air. And at $100 to $200 a ton, it could be big business. Solar geoengineering, on the other hand, is so cheap that nobody currently stands to make money from the process.
But just because a solution is cheap doesn't make it a good one. It's cheap and dangerous.
It doesn't require a lot of materials. It doesn't require a big innovation. It basically affects the whole planet with one project. So that is not necessarily a situation that has a lot of profit opportunity, right? Because there's not going to be a lot of different people that can do it and compete in a marketplace.
Bill Gates is among a dozen individual donors and 14 foundations backing the first stratospheric solar geoengineering experiment out of Harvard. It's called Stratospheric Controlled Perturbation Experiment, or SCOPEX. A high-altitude balloon will lift instruments about 20 kilometers into the stratosphere, where it will release less than 2 kilograms of different naturally occurring chemicals, like calcium carbonate and sulfates, and then measure the change in atmospheric chemistry and light scattering. The Harvard group that runs SCOPEX and other experiments has raised more than $16 million, more than double any other solar geoengineering effort. And annual global funding has gone up from $1 million in 2008 to $8 million in 2018, with the majority of that funding coming from the US. The first phase of SCOPEX will cost around $3 million, with much more needed for wider research on solar geoengineering. To this point, stratosphere injections have only been tested with climate modeling. In the UK, a government-funded solar radiation management test called SPICE was canceled in 2012 because of issues with patents.
And we're not trying to develop any technology that is patented or where we want to make money with this later on.
A study last year found that no existing aircraft can inject the stratosphere at a high enough altitude, but developing a new high-altitude tanker would not be technologically difficult or prohibitively expensive. Nozzles still need to be designed that can continuously blast out trillions of particles, and scientists still need to decide what chemicals those particles should be made of. But unlike cloud brightening, which is another solar reflection technique, the tech needed for stratospheric injections is not far off.
The technology is not the main thing that's holding this back. The main thing that's holding it back is the uncertainty about what the exact effects would be and the positives and negatives of its effects, and the governance and decision-making process for implementing it.
Other radical attempts to control climate change have been tested in the past, like when one California businessman dumped 100 tons of iron dust in the Pacific to spawn the growth of carbon-absorbing plankton. But unlike small, sometimes rogue experiments, planet-wide solar geoengineering will require buy-in from the international community.
You know, in our simulations, we found China got warmer and drier relative to the past, when you stabilize global temperature, and India was now cooler and wetter. So you can see there how, you know, international relations around using this technology could become complicated.
I mean, we can't even decide on what to do about emissions of greenhouse gases. And so how are we going to decide on setting the planetary thermostat?
There's the real concern that we won't be able to reach agreement, we being the entire planet. And so there's the prospect that countries just go ahead and do solar geoengineering, and that causes disagreement, conflict, tension, even possibly war.
3 years ago, the international community did come together when almost 200 countries signed the Paris Agreement on climate change, agreeing to limit global temperature rise to less than 2 degrees Celsius. Since then, President Trump has stated his intent to withdraw from the agreement.
The Paris Climate Accord is simply the latest example of Washington entering into an agreement that disadvantages the United States.
And global emissions are not being reduced fast enough to reach these goals.
We know what we should be doing. What we should be doing is reducing carbon emissions. So we're creating a moral hazard. We are providing an out for you where you can say, well, I'm going to fix this technologically instead of doing the ethically right thing to do.
It's way too early to give up on much more ethical approaches to climate change. Right. The future generations are literally in the room to question us on our dubious arguments. We wouldn't get far with some of the kinds of arguments we're trying to offer.
So, a couple of things, and I said this video is going to be an hour, but I forgot this is a presentation, not just me talking. So, my goal is to not go past an hour and a half, and I'm not going to go past an hour and a half. But she mentioned simulation. Right. So she's implying that there have been, when they talk about simulation in terms of the Jim Jones juice, or, you know, they're using technology in order to project or to determine or to make an educated guess, if you will, about what's going to happen in the future. This is, you know, in terms of the Jim Jones juice, and I'm going to get into this in the Kingdom Within, but basically, they used an artificial intelligence simulation in order to estimate the impact that so-called CV19 was going to have. And even the actual disease or illness, quote unquote, is they haven't even isolated it. They used a computer simulation in order to construct what they're calling CVD19, but more of that later, on that later. So when she talks about simulations, she's talking about a computer model-based estimate of what this technology, the impact that it could have. So these people are lying, like 100% lying. This technology is already going. They've spent billions and billions and billions of dollars. They talk about how cheap it is for 1 year. How much multiply that? What did she say? No, she said 3 billion, I think. Multiply that by 40 years. What are we talking about? 120, 150 billion dollars. And I believe that probably only scratches the surface, because this is multi-layered. They haven't even talked about the antennas in Alaska and the antennas across the planet, which I'm going to show a map of the globe and where these different antennas and these different heaters that are heating up the upper atmosphere, right? So we're talking about hundreds of billions, if not trillions of dollars that have already been spent, and that is continuously being spent every day. But I wanted to show that because, you know, first of all, anything that Bill Gates is involved in, run anything beyond meat, solar radiation, the Jim Jones juice, his so-called philanthropic projects all across the world, including Gavi. He's been so heavily, he's so busy in Africa, while we're bragging about the fact that of the percentage of Africans that haven't taken the Jim Jones juice. Yeah, but they have another plan for Africa. It's already underway. So the lies all of the lies that have been perpetrated in this video and around this conversation as if this is something they're preparing for when this is something that they've been doing for the last 40 years. All right, let's get back to this. So, the aerosol operation is a joint operation between the Pentagon and the pharmaceutical industry. The Pentagon wishes to test biological diseases for war purposes on unsuspecting populations. It was stated that SARS, this is a quote from Under an Ionized Sky by Alana Freeland. SARS is a failure as the expected rate of mortality was intended to be 80%. The pharmaceutical industry is making trillions on medications designed to treat both fatal and non-fatal diseases. Think dementia, ADHD, and Alzheimer's. They're spraying particles and toxins in the air. And this is only one